Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra at d1baseball.com. I'm joining you live on location for this video. You are looking live, as Keith Jackson used to say on college football broadcasts, the University of Missouri baseball press box here. I'm in town for their series against Florida this weekend. They were kind enough to let me break into here to use their press box to record this video this morning. True story. Last time I was in this press box was 2019. I had a terrible cold, or was getting over a terrible cold, and I used too much nasal spray, the Afrin stuff. Lost my sense of smell for most of the next couple of days because of the overuse of Afrin. So there's a Joe history story for you there in the Missouri press box. Hopefully, better memories to come the next couple of days. We're going to get you ready for Friday's action around SEC baseball. First, let's talk about some news items from the week that was in the SEC. In no particular order, just kind of compiled these as they came throughout the week. But the most impactful midweek result, I think, has to be LSU losing to Southern. Now, obviously, since then, LSU's played another game. We'll talk about that. But after the loss, Jay Johnson, this was according to Koki Riley for The Advocate, who was a guest on my Highway to Hoover podcast recently, but he got the quote from Jay that says, I clipped part of it here, but it's a real privilege to play here, and either you're going to do it or you're not. So that kind of makes it pretty clear that Jay has not been thrilled, not just with the play on the field, but I perceive that he's not been thrilled with some of the buy-in, maybe some of the attitude stuff, some of the mental side of the game, all that stuff. Apparently there's no phones allowed, kind of in I don't know if it's just locker room, on the field, what it is exactly, what the parameters are, but basically curtailing cell phone use for LSU's players. So clearly Jay drawing a line that the way they have played will not fly. As I mentioned, they played Thursday. They got to win. We'll dive into that a little deeper here in just a minute, but certainly it seemed like the Southern loss might have been a little bit of a straw that broke a camel's back there in that game. Hello to Jeremy Scott as he joins us on Facebook with his usual Roll Tide. Big weekend this weekend for Alabama against Kentucky. Fascinating series. Both teams go into that series thinking they got a chance to win it. I'll be watching that one pretty closely as the weekend goes on. Armstrong Grappling comes in early on YouTube. Joe, I have an opportunity for you. I'll let you I'll put it here on the screen. I'll let you get in early before everyone else joins. How would you like to jump back on the LSU Tiger trade? Sure. If you'll have me, yeah, absolutely. Scoot over, make room for me, Armstrong. I thought this team still, and if I didn't say this on Howie to Hoover or on this show, I apologize, because I think it's something I thought even after seeing them get swept last weekend, that this team's too talented to not have a run in them. The early part of the schedule in the SEC play was always going to be tough, including this weekend against Vanderbilt, even at home, right? So they were always just going to have to keep their heads above water and do what they could to fight their way through it. And I remember talking to Jay Johnson in the preseason, and he was pretty fixated on, hey, our SEC schedule is no joke the first few weeks. We're just going to have to just fight through it and scratch and claw, and we're going to take some losses, and we're going to get bruised up, but we're just going to have to deal with it. And that's kind of where they're at now. I don't think they anticipated being 2-7 coming out of last weekend, but it's just kind of par for the course in the SEC right now. So yeah, kudos to LSU for the bounce back. So yeah, Armstrong, save me some room on the LSU Tiger train if you don't mind, because I do think they've got a run in them. Now how far that gets them this season, we'll see. But I do think they're just too talented not to have a run in them. Other news here. In the midweek, both Magnolia State teams, Mississippi State, Ole Miss losing midweek games, State losing to Central Arkansas, Ole Miss losing to Memphis. Kind of goes to show that, Ole Miss has been struggling. Obviously, last weekend was not good for them against Kentucky. But even for State, it kind of goes to show that, look, things are better at State, but they're still kind of fighting through some stuff in the midweek and some stuff to close out weekends. So it's been an improvement, but it's still not maybe a finished product or where they would like it to be. Tennessee, a few things here on the injury front. I saw this reported by a few Tennessee people. So shout out, I forget who I read this from exactly, but shout out to Ben McKee, Mike Wilson, Ryan Shumpert, those guys on the Tennessee beat. Billy Amick likely out this weekend against Auburn. No update on AJ Russell on the mound. I anticipate that means we're not going to see him this weekend, obviously, but it also suggests to me, and this is just Joe reading between the lines, also suggests to me that they're not optimistic necessarily about getting him back soon. We'll obviously see on that. Andrew Banky, a depth piece in the bullpen, back this weekend. So any depth that they can get, especially with the injury to Russell and what have you, is going to be big for Tennessee. So that's big news as well. Their opponent this weekend, Auburn, shaking up their rotation, understandably so when you consider that, Jace Alsop, Joseph Gonzalez, Connor McBride, Carson Myers, those guys have all thrown on the weekends. There have been individual good starts along the way, but nobody has really locked down spots in the weekend rotation from that group. So they're going Dylan Watts, who's been good in the bullpen so far this season, TBA. So clearly just kind of taking it on a game-by-game basis right now, and hard to blame Auburn. I mean, offensively, they've done enough. Last weekend against A&M, they were in every game because of their offense. They just couldn't do enough on the mound to make it matter. So doing a little bit of shaking up this weekend. We'll see, obviously, how that goes. Back on YouTube, Armstrong Grappling comes back in with who is more on upset alert, Tennessee at Auburn or A&M at South Carolina. And, here's why that's tough for me. On current form and talent, I want to say South Carolina. I like the way Eli Jones is pitching. I like that offense in theory. It hasn't always been easy for that offense this season, but I like that offense in theory. They're playing at, they're playing in a home series. On the other end of the spectrum, though, I feel much like LSU that Auburn has a run left in them. They're not a 1-8 team. Now they are, but on talent, they're not a 1-8 team, and they always tend to be a little bit of a late starter in SEC play. So I think there's something there. So give me South Carolina. I like that team more right now. Also, Tennessee feels like a little bit like they've had some things not go their way, and maybe the tide will turn a little bit. No pun intended there with Alabama, but the tide will turn for Tennessee a little bit, and when they start to get healthier again and start to get guys back, that maybe they'll get hot again, because I really like their talent. I think they have a very good chance to be the third best team in the SEC when it's all said and done. With right now, it's Arkansas, A&M, and then kind of everyone else in the league, it feels like. So give me South Carolina of those choices, but both being home series for Auburn and South Carolina, I think they both have to look at those as opportunities to kind of get back on the horse after series losses last weekend. Finishing up some news here. For Missouri, where I'm at, Jackson Lovich has been dealing with a thumb injury. Obviously, their offense has struggled in general. Jackson Lovich has been the best player on offense, best player in the lineup for them. So that's big. We'll see if he plays this weekend. I've not gotten an update today, but he did not play in the midweek. Obviously, getting him back is going to be huge for a Missouri lineup that just has been non-competitive too often this season. Scored only 2 runs last weekend against Vanderbilt. Their pitchers did a good job against Vanderbilt. They allowed 10 runs in 3 games. Like, that's typically going to win you a lot of games, but they only scored 2. That's just a tough way to live. So, so Jackson Lovich on kind of injury watch there. And then finally, speaking of guys coming back from injuries, Nate Dome from Mississippi State, not in the rotation for State. However, there is an expectation that we could see him this weekend at some point. Now, we'll see if State feels confident enough to use him in a high leverage spot, or if they want to ease him back into something a little less than that. We'll see. But getting him back in any sense is going to be good for State. This feels a little like last year where Dome missed some time. Now, it was later in the season, but Dome missed some time. He came back. He wasn't quite the same guy down the stretch, but he was effective for a team that at that time really needed anybody to get outs. This team's obviously in a lot better shape in that regard, but he's still going to be an important piece down the stretch. They're best when he's in there. Even a Nate Dome that's maybe not at his peak is still going to be a very, very good pitcher for a team that's going to need as much as they can get to survive down the stretch in the SEC. Let's talk about the Thursday games real quick. Ole Miss and Arkansas. Arkansas wins at 5-2 over Ole Miss. Hagen Smith, 6 innings pitched, 4 hits, 2 runs, 4 walks, 11 strikeouts. Pretty similar to his outing last weekend against LSU. A handful of walks, gave up a couple runs, but felt like he was in control of that. So just kind of another, ho-hum is maybe not the right way to put it, but just another another great start for Hagen Smith. And then on the other side, Riley Maddox pitched pretty well for Ole Miss in the start. It just felt like, and I didn't see this live, We were recording and I was prepping and recording the weekend preview episode with Runes and Aaron and Kendall, so I wasn't able to be locked in on this, but it looks from the results that Maddox pitched pretty well, and they just maybe tried to push a little too much with him and get him into a sixth inning, and it just didn't go well. So his stat line doesn't look great, but he actually pitched better than that's going to suggest, and the bullpen did a nice job behind him. So again, a story that we've heard a little bit the last couple of weeks with Ole Miss is that, okay, this happened last week with Riley Maddox, where he pitched well enough to win, but in that case, the defense really let him down. So a couple weekends in a row where they've gotten something from the starting pitcher, but not able to take advantage. And then we've alluded to it a couple times, but LSU 10, Vanderbilt 6. Good offensive effort. Didn't let Grayson Carter for Vanderbilt get comfortable. They hit him around. They fought things off. Like, shout out to Aria Gerson of the Tennessean, who kind of tipped me off to the fact that with Grayson Carter, it's not so much he's not throwing strikes. His strike percentage is good. It's that he's not really putting hitters away. And as we know, if you get into 3-2 counts and you've got guys fouling stuff off, that as that at bat continues, you're more likely to get a walk or a hit or a positive result for the offensive player. So that's kind of more what's happening. But in this case, it looked like LSU just kind of really was all over him. So jumped out to a big lead, and that means that ultimately LSU wins the Luke Holman start. I talked about it on Baton Rouge Radio yesterday in my weekly hit there, that this felt big for LSU to win the Luke Holman start, because the next 2 days Vanderbilt's got Bryce Cunningham and Carter Holton going, and you don't feel as comfortable in those games from an offensive standpoint. Now, Holman, it wasn't his best start, so they didn't necessarily win because of Luke Holman, but they did win the Luke Holman start. Griffin Herring was great. I think just as important as winning the Luke Holman start is winning the Luke Holman start is winning the outing in which Griffin Herring gave you 3 really good innings, because you want to deploy him in games where you end up winning the game. So a good win for LSU there. Feels important for them to get this series. I think it's doable. Cunningham and Holton are obviously good pitchers, but Vanderbilt has its own offensive issues, so we'll see how that plays out the next couple of days. Game of the day today, speaking of a series that Armstrong brought up, A&M in South Carolina this weekend. To me, that's the game of the day today. I'm interested in seeing what Eli Jones does as a Friday starter. I've talked about him a lot the last few weeks because him being a real Friday guy for South Carolina is so important. This is a different deal against this A&M offense. We know this offense is really, really good. The top 3 hitters they have in their lineup, or at least the way they used them last weekend, Grahovac, Laviolette, Montgomery, as good as any trio in the country in a lineup. So that's a difficult task for Eli Jones. But the last few weeks, he's shown that he might be up for it and put his team in position to win the game. That's going to be super, super important. And then in the bigger picture with South Carolina, I don't know that I still don't know that I have a very good feel for how good this team really is. I think it's good. I don't mean that as a criticism necessarily. It's just I'm not sure of the ceiling yet. I was really impressed by the way, I was there for the Vanderbilt series, and I was really impressed by the way that they handled Vanderbilt. But since then, we've seen Vanderbilt struggle to score runs against Missouri, and then they lose a Thursday game to LSU. So how good is, how do we judge that Vanderbilt series now? I also like that South Carolina salvaged a game last weekend in that series. So kind of a shoulder shrug from me on just what the ceiling is for South Carolina. So doing something in this series against A&M, I think, would send a pretty powerful message about their ceiling. So I'm looking forward to tonight's game, because I think with Jones on the mound, South Carolina has to feel fairly confident they'll be in this one at least. And then pitching matchup of the day, I'm fascinated by Georgia and Mississippi State, with Charlie Goldstein going for Georgia, Cal Steven going for Mississippi State, because this is all going to be about, those aren't the 2 highest profile pitchers throwing on Friday in the SEC, but it's 2 important pitchers because both of those offenses are good. Georgia in particular, has been hitting home runs at a really impressive clip. So this is all about which of these 2 starters can slow down the opposing offense. I don't think there's any stopping these offenses necessarily, but you've got to put up some zeros to give your team a chance, even if you score a bunch of runs. So which of these 2 guys does that is probably going to be the one for the team who comes out on top. Charlie Goldstein's been solid so far this season, which is just kind of the pitcher he was. He was, even at his best last year, he was solid versus dominant. And then Cal Steven has been a little up and down this season, but his good has been good. His good has been very good. So we'll see what happens tonight in that pitching matchup. A couple of comments here. Hope on YouTube says, I said Carolina seems to play better at home until they lost to Georgia Southern this past Tuesday. Yeah, that's, midweek games are kind of weird. So, but I see your point there, Hope. And yeah, I think the home field advantage is big for Carolina at Founders Park. Now we'll see, the women's basketball team plays in the Final Four this week, and we'll see if that affects kind of the atmosphere around Founders, especially if they, win and move on to the final this weekend. So that'll be kind of a little subplot to follow there, is how that affects the atmosphere, if any at all. It might not. But yes, the home field advantage in the SEC has been very, very strong. And Founders is one place where there is a real decided home field advantage. So that in their favor certainly gives them a puncher's chance this weekend against A&M. And then, Corey Griggs on Facebook, a little bit of a somewhat unrelated question, but we'll go ahead because it's a good one. How about the ACC? Clemson should be number one with the number one RPI, number three strength of schedule, sweep South Carolina, Florida State, and win series 2-1 over Duke. Biased SEC as always. I'm assuming that's directed at me, which is fair, Corey. I mean, this is an SEC podcast, so we are talking SEC here. But yeah, Clemson is in that mix. I don't think any one of us at D1 Baseball is disrespecting how good Clemson is, right? We've got them shoved up in the rankings, number 2. There's really only one spot where they could be higher, and I see that you're advocating for them to be number 1, and I think that's reasonable. But from our standpoint, we're looking at it as, we just think Arkansas, with that pitching staff right now, in a college baseball atmosphere where having elite pitching is so rare these days because the offenses are so good, because they have that elite pitching staff, it puts them a cut above. But I don't think that's coming from any sort of place of being disrespectful to how good Clemson is. That looks like an Omaha team, and I'd love to see it as someone who, grew up watching college baseball in the late 90s and early 2000s and remembers Khalil Green running around out there and the Clemson cut pants and the white cleats and all that. I would love to see a big brand like that, to be back in Omaha. So yeah, I mean, shout out to Clemson. Maybe they have a case for number 1, definitely. But on this show, you're hearing a lot about the SEC because that's what this show's about, is SEC baseball. My buddy Jeremy Scott on Facebook, Alabama in the Final Four too, and not many people giving them a chance. Yeah, it's a great point, Jeremy. Alabama, first ever men's basketball Final Four. And yeah, tough draw, obviously, with UConn that looks like frankly a buzzsaw. This is not a college basketball podcast, but man, my take on that is as much fun as a UConn Purdue final would be in the men's tournament. It would be nice to have some competitive Final Four games. So, Jeremy, I'm rooting for Bama to at least push UConn a little bit so we can get some good Final Four games. And I imagine if Alabama does that, it's because they shot and made about 1 million 3-pointers. So that feels like their path there. So yes, Alabama also in the Final Four. Good shout out there. That is going to do it, folks, for this edition of Weekend Waypoints at SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. It is beautiful as I look out this press box window here in Columbia, Missouri. I hope the weather is beautiful where you are and that we have some wonderful games this evening around the SEC. Enjoy them, folks, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow morning.